Hello everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration Web Seminar. It's so good to have you all with us. My name is Kurt Isley-Durley. I'm the magazine's web seminar editor, and I'll be your moderator. The title of today's event, as you see here, is Strengthening Literacy and Math Intervention, and is being brought to you free of charge by our sponsor today, McGraw-Hill. Today we're fortunate to have with us some nationally recognized experts in literacy and math intervention who will be speaking with us about ways of helping challenged students to succeed through more effective intervention strategies. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes here. Before we do, though, just some quick housekeeping here for you. If you're having any trouble listening through your computer speakers, or if you prefer to listen over the telephone, you can click that request telephone button that you should see up in the top right there under the attendee panel. That will give you a phone number and access code. And you may also have noticed we just posted those in the chat window in the middle right of your screen. Speaking of which, you can use that chat panel to send a message to our host and producer, Kylie Lacey, about any technical issues you may be having, and she will help you out. If you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to use the Q&A panel that you should see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Please just make sure it's set to all panelists, the default option. Feel free to send a question at any time during the presentation today. We'll answer as many as possible when we get to the Q&A session towards the end of today's seminar. So once again, if you have a question, feel free to ask at any time in the Q&A box, bottom right-hand corner there. Also, our speaker slide decks will be available for you to download, and the archived recording of today's presentation will also be available for you to review or forward to your colleagues, but I'll tell you more about that a little bit later on. So with that, on to our program. Today we're fortunate to have with us Nancy Marchand-Martella. She's Professor of Special Education at Eastern Washington University and a McGraw-Hill education author. Ron Martella is also a professor of special education at Eastern Washington University and is a McGraw-Hill education author as well. And Robyn Silbey is founder, math coach, and consultant at Robyn Silbey Professional Development and also a McGraw-Hill education author. Ron and Nancy are going to start us off talking about literacy intervention. So I will turn it over to them at this point. Ron and Nancy, welcome to today's web seminar.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. And we'll say good morning and good afternoon. We're in Spokane, Washington, where we're looking out the window at a beautiful 70-plus sunny day. So hopefully it's nice where you are as well. Today we're going to be talking about strengthening the literacy intervention curriculum for struggling K-12 students, and lots of interesting developments for the future of literacy for students who struggle in the area of reading.
Every year, annually, the International Reading Association completes a survey surveying 25 literacy leaders from the United States, Canada, and outside North America. And the respondents are asked what, in terms of literacy education, what's receiving attention and what's not. In the survey, the most recent survey, we wanted to go over some of the findings. The first has to do with the two extremely hot topics. Now, extremely hot means that 100% of the respondents were in agreement that these were hot. The first is close reading, deep reading, and the second is Common Core State Standards.
So just to say a few things about these, we're going to really certainly talk more about close reading as we progress through this webinar, but these two particular areas are getting a lot of play, and if you think about when you're looking at programs currently and programs that we would be targeting in the future, you're looking at reading text that is more complex, where you make multiple passes through the text. And we'll, again, talk more about that in a little bit. And, of course, the Common Core State Standards are certainly important, and we're looking at programs that are built to address the Common Core State Standards in English Language Arts. So you're zooming in on informational text, literature, looking at language, writing aspects, and speaking and listening.
The second category has to do with very hot. This is where 75% of the respondents were in agreement, and of those, there were 6 very hot topics. These included college and career readiness. And notice with the asterisk there, by the way, these were also considered very hot in 2014. The second is high-stakes assessment. Third, informational nonfiction text. Fourth, text complexity, and that's becoming a very important topic in the future, and we'll address that more in depth later. Fifth, digital literacies and new literacies. And sixth, writing, argumentative, and based on sources.
So you'll see a trend in those very hot areas, and everything really now is focusing on what can we do early to get kids into much more difficult text, where they're learning lots of important background knowledge to really help them do better on assessments and help them really be prepared for college and beyond. So there's really a trend as you look through all of these extremely hot, very hot topics that we need to do more as educators for all students. And when you think about struggling students, these are going to be quite challenging.
Third category have to do with hot topics, and this is where 50% or more of the respondents were in agreement, and there were 7. One is adolescent literacy. Comprehension is number 2. Third, disciplinary content area literacy. Fourth, English learners, English as a second language. Fifth, political policy influences on literacy. Sixth is STEM literacy, and you've seen that getting a lot more attention in the recent days. And finally, vocabulary, word meaning.
So with regard to these 7, there's definitely a focus on reading to learn strategies, reading to gather information from text. Again, a focus on older learners, adolescent learners, typically those in grades 4 through 12, sometimes dipping down into grade 3. The notion of content area and disciplinary literacy I find to be very interesting, and Shanahan talk about the difference there, one being, or the primary reason being, content area literacy looks at strategies that you can use no matter the content area. So strategies that you could use in science and social studies text. Disciplinary literacy focuses on what would you do in a particular area. So what would be a science-oriented strategy or a social studies-oriented strategy as an example. Of course, English learners, certainly a big area. And I'll just kind of drop down into STEM. Anything in science, technology, engineering, and math is certainly important. And interesting that the vocab is mentioned there, because a lot of STEM literacy really relates to the vocabulary that aligns with areas in science and math and so forth.
The figure that is up now shows you visually what's hot, what's not, and so on. So if you look, for example, the 3 circles, the red circles, that's what's extremely hot. Again, close reading, Common Core State Standards. If you notice what should be hot, again, adolescent literacy should be hot. Comprehension, English learners, informational nonfiction text, and preschool literacy, instruction experiences. What should not be hot, it's interesting though, to point at that too, point you to that. One is high stakes assessment, second, phonics, phonemic awareness, and third would be fluency.
And when you're looking at should not be hot, that doesn't mean that don't do it. It really, in my mind, means that we've figured it out. For example, fluency, we know fluency is important, but as you know, we've made great strides in the area of fluency and are certainly doing a great job in that area. So the way I would view that would be is that, you know, we're looking at things that we need to do a better job on so we can really help kids in school. We'll go through the 5 elements of effective reading instruction, grades K to 3. And these are really based on the National Reading Panel report. A good document also to read would be Put Reading First. And the big 5 elements, we'll put them all up and then I'll quickly talk about them. Phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and text comprehension. And these should be evident in any K-3 reading program. So just real quickly, phonemic awareness really relates to if you can do it in the dark, it's phonemic awareness. So if you can close your eyes and I tell you to tell me the sounds in Sam, you would say or if I said tell me the word, you could say Sam. Again, you could do that in the dark. You could do it with your eyes closed. That's phonemic awareness. Phonics relates to the alphabetic principle, so seeing the letter M and then producing the sound would be phonics. Fluency relates to reading text quickly, accurately, and with expression, also called prosody. Vocabulary, of course, relates to understanding what words mean. And then text comprehension relates to teaching students strategies related to reading for understanding. But there are a different set for grades 4 to 12, and these are based on the research documents that you see surrounding this slide. Zooming in on Reading Next or even the IES research analysis on best practices for older learners. And there are these 5 as well. So we've got word study, fluency, vocab, comprehension, and motivation. So you see commonalities with fluency, vocab, and comp, but you see 2 new ones, the first being word study. And for older learners, we're moving beyond, of course, the phonemic awareness phonics into looking at studying words based on root words, prefixes, suffixes, multisyllabic word reading strategies, and so forth. So we're really ramping it up for older learners. Again, if a student struggles, we'd have to dip back down into teaching sound combinations and blending strategies. And then motivation, because a lot of these learners, because they're struggling in the area of reading, and now it's grade 4, are finding reading not to be reinforcing. So we have to think about innovative ways of hooking these students to get them really interested in what's being read and being a part of the reading instruction. The best model to use when we're looking at readers who struggle and we can certainly look at readers who struggle, whether they're English language learners or not. The best practice for these has to do with the gradual release model. And with that model, we provide an I do, where the teacher, or if we're looking at digital-based learning, the computer would be showing students how to do the skill or strategy, and then gradually releasing the level of support and handing it over to the students. This really is a good pre-correction, sort of an errorless learning strategy, so students won't be making mistakes, which certainly can cause frustration and so forth. So starting with an I do, moving to a we do, we're gradually releasing the level of assistance, where students are getting lots of rich feedback on their performance, corrective and positive. And as students are moving through, again, the teacher's releasing or the computer's releasing responsibility into a monitor or you-do phase, where students are independent. We want to ensure that students are learning at high levels, so there are always mastery checks that are placed there. And then once students are demonstrating high levels of performance, we move them into a review cycle so that skills don't atrophy.
I want to point out, too, this model, sometimes we get into a philosophical debate with regard to more of an explicit instructional model versus more of a constructivist. And I do want to point out that this model, we've addressed this previously in other settings, but the model you see there is also quite consistent with the social learning theory model, or social constructivist model, where we're looking at where the student is or slightly above where the student is. That would be the zone. of professional development. The guided practice is basically scaffolding. So really what we're looking at with the graduate release model is trying to decrease error rates for these students and accelerate learning, but also making sure that we're meeting their needs through a scaffolded type of process.
Now, we're going to address a readability gap, and I'll talk more about this after Ron reads it.
Overall, the gap between readability of high school texts and university texts is between 265 lexile and 350 lexile, depending upon the study. That's considered a large difference, 2 or more standard deviations. It's quite large. This is like having a 75% comprehension at one point, for example, at the end of your senior year, and 50% comprehension 3 months later when you're beginning your freshman year in college, for example. That's if you have a 250 lexile difference. And again, the research is showing 265 to 350. So the comprehension of students when they're entering into college is quite a bit less or lower than what we need for them to be successful.
Right. So this really speaks to the notion that we need to move students into much more complex text far earlier than we really have ever done before. And when you look at like the Common Core State Standards, you're going to start to see text or stretch bands that have moved lexile levels far higher than we've seen in previous years. And again, the reason is because there's such a gap when students graduate from high school and go into college. We really need to ensure that they're able to handle the tough text demands that they'll see, you know, in college and tech schools and so forth. So let's talk more just real quickly about text complexity. And again, we need to ramp up our efforts on increasing student access to challenging text. And, you know, this was an interesting article. I would encourage you to read it by Shanahan. It's in Reading Today. We need to include students in reading text at the frustration level. When I first read that, I thought, you know, what? I couldn't believe my eyes. But as I read further, I really do get it. And the notion is that in order to get students into reading this complex text, but they're far lower in terms of decoding, we keep working on decoding, of course, but we can move them into a lot of rich comp and conversations over comp if we do the following. And that would be the teacher reads the text aloud at first, and then the students participate in those kind of comp activities. So again, oral reading practice before comp activities. And then pre-teaching a lot of the tough vocabulary before they access the text. So again, you're having students participate in these rich comp activities. Again, if they're very low in terms of decoding, you're certainly working on that. But we can't remove students from these reading to learn activities. And as we talked about before, an extremely hot area as identified by the International Reading Association is close reading. We just wanted to go through quickly what these areas are in terms of how to do it. One would be taking a first pass or a first read, and that's where you answer some questions about the text or perhaps you retell the plot. Then you would do a second read, so you're reading it again. It might be a total or partial read. Where you focus on, you know, how's the text organized? What's the quality of the evidence that's provided? Maybe why would the author use a word or a vocabulary word? What literary devices are used, and so forth. And then you take a third pass through the reading, and this is where you're digging deeper and asking what was the author's point? What does it mean to me? What connections can I make? And, you know, it just brings Austin Powers to mind, of course. The third read is whoop-de-doo, Basil, what does it all mean? And that's what you want kids to be able to think about and say as they go through a close reading exercise. One program to kind of showcase this would be SRA Flex Literacy. This particular program has 3 experiences. It has a digital experience, and as you know, or as we noted, it is considered to be a hot area. It also includes a print experience where students are doing a close read. They're getting tougher text-dependent questions and so forth. And then a project experience where students are starting to research and and analyze research questions and present their findings. So when you're looking at best practices and sort of the hot areas, you're looking at the 5 elements of effective reading for students who struggle with a gradual release model and so forth. This is just one program that we could showcase that is also built to address the Common Core. So let's do a quick summary.
First, we need to focus on hot categories. Second, include the big 5 elements, grades K to 3, and then the big 5 for 4 to 12. Third, use the gradual release model or scaffolding. Fourth, focus on complex text with close reading.
Okay, and that concludes our presentation on reading intervention.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much, Ron and Nancy, for that. And we're turning it over to Robyn Silbey. Robyn, welcome.
Thank you, and welcome, everybody. We're so delighted that you're with us today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about math intervention, and we're going to talk about the best teaching methods and strategies for preventing the potential failure for our struggling students. We really have a national issue with students and mathematics. You can see by the bottom comic, in Math No One Can Hear You Scream, and I feel like that kind of speaks to the way a lot of us felt when we grew up learning math, and we're really trying, or the boredom, as you can see in the top picture, that we're really trying to address now with the Common Core standards. In conjunction with the Common Core state standards, and that I do want to stop here and say how much I loved the reading presentation and how similar and how parallel it is in math, because comprehension is a huge issue in mathematics. And if I were to do a hot topic study, I think comprehension would be a big issue, and I also think the Common Core would. And your hot and not and what's perceived and what's real, I thought it was completely consistent with what we find in mathematics. At any event, the What Works Clearinghouse through the U.S. Department of Education came up with some ideas of ways that we can help kids with intervention. And that is to, you'll see the ones that are in blue, all of these came directly from the website. The ones that are in blue are the ones that I'll be briefly speaking about today. So the first one is to provide interventions to all students who are identified as needing it. One of the big things that we want is to increase discourse in the classroom with a verbalization of the thought processes. That directly addresses the Common Core state standards for mathematical practice. And we'll talk a little more about that. Interventions have to include instruction on solving word problems, and of course, that has a lot to do with comprehension. We want kids to be able to not only have concrete representations, but visual representations. So you talked about phonemic awareness, and this is the parallel to that. This is the analogous idea in math, is a visual representation. Interventions need to devote about 10 minutes in each session to building fluency. So it really does help if the kids know their math facts. That said, I want to be very real about saying that kids can move on conceptually even if they can't tell you what 6 times 7 is. You shouldn't impede their progress because they haven't memorized their facts. That's 2 different kinds of skill building. And then, of course, intervention has to include ongoing progress monitoring. So let's get started. In summary, it's that we want our kids to think and to talk about it, to explore problems, to represent visually, practice facts, monitor progress, and again, just like in reading, we have to motivate our kids. So the verbalization of thought processes, which is where I'm going to begin right now, is just having kids think a little bit and then talk. And the best strategy that I have seen is for kids to talk to a partner in a low-risk format first. So you offer a great open-ended question, then have the kids talk about that with a partner or in a small group, and then have a group share in the classroom. That means you have to stop cold calling one student at a time and putting that kid on the spot and letting all the other kids off the hook. If you ask a question that's good enough for class time, then it's good enough for everybody to chew on and build the knowledge, and then you can have a class discussion that involves more people. And all those closet smarties are going to come out and surprise you just how wonderful your kids really are. The advantages to that chewing, as I refer to it, is that the kids have a little bit of rehearsal time, and they are validated by their partners or their group mates. It builds their confidence, and it helps the kids learn even though they don't know they're learning, so kind of like secret learning. Here are just a couple of concrete examples for you. One would be an every pupil response, where you might ask kids what the difference of 12 and 7 is. And I have the kids hold up their fingers, as you can see in the picture. I have the kids hold up their fingers to show the difference between 12 and 7. Or, you know, for older kids, the slope of the equation, y equals 5x minus 7. And for every one of them, you want the kids first to turn to each other, tell what they think the answer is, explain how they know. And then they take turns telling things when there are many, many answers or many, many possible correct solutions, some ways to make 100. You would just be amazed at how many different creative ways kids have to make 100, using all 4 operations, exponents, fractions, all kinds of wonderful things. So making it open-ended like that is a great way to differentiate in an open-ended situation. If you're talking about problem solving, the comprehension is really important. You can see my very first bullet here invites children to paraphrase the problem, because if they can't tell you what the problem is about, it's impossible for them to solve it. Then it just comes down to pulling the numbers out and doing the operation that corresponds with the chapter in the book. There was a time in the past where folks would read the problem and underline key words. But those key words don't really get at the whole picture, the comprehension of the whole problem. And again, I think that really speaks to reading comprehension and how important that is in math intervention and math literacy. And then asking the kids to justify their reasoning with each other. And again, for all of them, we have to have the children justify their thinking. I want to spend a moment on problem solving because I find that problem solving is really where the greatest problem is for these folks, for children of all skill levels, but particularly for those kids in intervention. And that is that we tend to have kids rush to the solve step, or kids believe that they have to rush to the solve stage before they fully understand the problem and before they've been able to make a plan other than just take these numbers and subtract the smaller from the larger, or divide if it looks like they need more than one grouping. And I also feel like when they've solved the problem, they just move forward and don't look back to see if their solution actually makes sense in the problem. So we need to be a little more deliberate about making sure that, again, alludes to the comprehension, that if they put the response back or their solution back into the problem and they read for comprehension, they can see whether that solution actually makes logical sense to them. So I propose that for some children, it might be a good strategy to devote a day to nothing but understanding problems. It's essentially a reading lesson where the kids would read a problem, paraphrase it, explain what it's about in their own words, and then not plan, not solve, move to another problem. Then maybe draw some parallels between the problems, maybe categorize them into which ones they feel like they can sense that the solution would be relatively large, relatively small, and so forth. And then the second day, we would throw that plan in. Again, not rushing to solve, but really getting kids to talk about what the problem is about and how they might tackle it, and all the different ways they might tackle it. Finally, on day 3, we give the kids the opportunity to solve that problem and then to assess their solution for reasonableness. So I see this as a multi-stage approach that really zeroes in on each important part of problem solving. One of the recommendations from the What Works Clearinghouse is to represent visually, and I think it's best to use a concrete pictorial abstract approach, which you can see a couple of examples there. If you look at 1,324, you can see that it's made with blocks. We have a way for kids to draw pictures of that, and then of course they can represent that number abstractly using the symbols. And then down at the bottom, you see a word problem. You see that the others, it is really not keywords. They are underlining the phrases that tell them facts about the problem, not just how many more or how many are left or how many in all. They're really picking up the facts of the problem. And then that is a bar diagram that shows how the problem is solved using a visual representation and, of course, the symbolic representation as well. Fact fluency is very important, and it is recommended by the What Works Clearinghouse to do 10 minutes during every intervention, but that doesn't need to be a boring mad minute that reinforces for the quick automaticity and punishes for those kids who can't. You can really vary the delivery and make it fun using strategy games, using songs and raps that really work well for auditory learners, and computer-generated activities and experiences, all that are available in intervention programs such as Number Worlds. And while I'm on the subject of Number Worlds, although I don't have a slide to show it, Number Worlds is written by 2 of the pioneers in early math and in intervention, Doug Clements and Julie Sarama, and it includes something spectacular that really speaks to the motivation, which I'll get to in a moment, but it's called project-based learning, and the kids learn how to problem solve and learn the math and practice and apply using a relevant, exciting, motivating, stimulating real-world context that makes it exciting for the kids to work through. So finally, I want to just spend a moment and talk about the best ways to monitor student progress during intervention. I really hate to see 3/5 or 3/4 of the time spent on assessing kids. So I like to make my assessments as quick as possible because we don't have a lot of time for intervention as it is. So I think that bi-monthly or monthly during the intervention, you want to use, other than a formal, this is an informal assessment. So it just needs, and frankly, I think it could happen more often than this if it looks like this. And that is 5 or 10 minutes, doesn't take too much instructional time away, pretty broad in scope, and scaffolded. So if you look at those 4 problems, it starts from pretty simple, just common fractions with a like denominator, to pretty complex mixed numbers with unlike denominators that are not, one is not a multiple of the other. And by asking the kids which one they can solve, most kids do go to the edge of their own intellectual boundaries without falling off. So a kid that can do the 3rd one probably would be bored doing the 1st one and wants to show off for themselves and for you. So I think by giving them those 4, you give them a nice spread of concept development, and from this you can really learn a lot, individualize instruction, and know how to pick up the gaps for your kids, for all of your kids. And then daily, something, again, very informal, several times during a session. I had already talked to you about like an every pupil response, but this doesn't really necessarily need to be, but it could be. So what is the difference between 27 and 41? And the kids hold up 1, 2, 3, or 4 fingers to indicate which choice, and then you ask them to justify their reasoning. These need to be built very deliberately. If you were to evaluate these responses, these solutions, each one highlights a common error that kids would make in finding the difference of 27 and 41. And we can use those to help us understand where the gaps are again with the kids. So that progress monitoring data and the flexible grouping maximizes every student's potential. And I just gave you a couple of little examples. I have one final slide that I think is probably the most important thing to remember when doing intervention with kids, whether it is in reading or in math. And that is, if a kid thinks they are so far away that they cannot possibly catch up, if they're 6 blocks from the bus, they don't even bother running for it. They really just give up and start walking in the other direction. We don't want that for our kids. We want our kids to think they can catch the bus, because if they think they're a block away and they're within running distance of catching that bus, they will run to catch it. And that's where we need our kids to be. That's all for me at the moment. Both Ron and Nancy and I are open for questions and look forward to hearing your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Robyn. And we just have this sponsor acknowledgement slide here. McGraw-Hill Education is sponsoring today's event. And if you want some more information about the products that Ron and Nancy and Robyn mentioned, you can go to this URL here if you're interested in learning more. So yes, let's get to your questions here. Just a couple reminders for our audience. I know there was a lot of great information contained in those slides. We had a couple questions there about, will the slides be available for download? And yes, everyone on the call today will be getting a follow-up email with a link to where you can download the slides. You can go back through them at your own pace. And of course, this event is also being recorded and will be archived on the DA site. And you'll get a link where you can access that recording as well. And another reminder, if you have a question, please feel free to enter it in the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there, and we'll get to as many as we can here. Let's see, first question, I think this one came in, Robyn, while you were presenting there, just asking, is the assumption that all classes have time dedicated to do intervention? Robyn, I think you addressed that a little bit, that we don't have a lot of time to do intervention, but maybe you could just touch on that subject again in general.
That's super. That's a great question. Wonderful question. Thank you for asking. There are two models that I have seen. One is a small group pull-out or push-in kind of situation within the body of the math instruction, within the focus instruction. But the one that I prefer is, pardon me, is a second block of time devoted to intervention. And I would say that would be intervention for all. So schools I work in, I propose that they make a 60-minute block for the on-grade level instruction, and then a separate 30-minute block for the intervention. And that really helps kids. That gives plenty of time for teachers to work a little bit on the fact fluency, and for teachers to do some differentiated instruction depending on the skill level of the kids.
Okay, great. Ron and Nancy, does that line up with your thoughts, or you have thoughts when it comes to finding the time to conduct intervention like this?
Well, we're real advocates of the multi-tiered support system, response to intervention kind of framework. So, you know, looking at what can we do in our Tier 1 core program to make learning as intentional as possible, certainly to front load it so students don't make errors, you know, from the outset would certainly be the first way of doing business. But if we do have students who need additional support, doing it, again, as Robyn mentioned, push-in or pull-out kinds of approaches would be adding double dosing. You know, sometimes for kids, hearing it again in a small group or focusing in on elements of a lesson in a small group is certainly a great way to go. But if you're looking at like a tier 2 where students would need additional support, you're looking at 20 to 30 minutes. That could be done. Some folks do it as a before school, after school kind of program. Is certainly be another way of doing business. Before getting into the area of special education, of course, is being a whole nother realm. But yeah, certainly doing it within the course of the time or before or after school might be another way of looking at it.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Let's see, another question here. Interesting question here. How might some of these interventions differ for our culturally and linguistically diverse students? So I assume that's you know, varying socioeconomic backgrounds as well as ELL students and things like that. Robyn, do you have thoughts on that? Does the intervention approach differ for students in those populations?
Well, the additional layer there is that the vocabulary is a different language, and when I talk about math vocabulary, we talk about words like table, which for a child for whom English is a second language, they believe that a table is the thing they sit at or eat lunch at. And of course, a table is a mathematical graphic organizer for data, and those are the kinds of things that it's just an additional layer that needs to take place, and of course it just makes comprehension all the more critical in an intervention situation.
Okay, thank you. Ron and Nancy, same question. Thoughts on reaching these students, a different intervention approach?
Yeah, the work by Claude Goldenberg from Stanford really speaks to this, I think, and that is that when you're looking at interventions or effective strategies, English learners are pretty much aligned to all other kids, meaning what works for English learners works for typically, you know, kids who are where English is their primary language. So the notion is that direct and explicit instruction would be a great way of doing business, being intentional with instruction, modeling, giving students opportunities to practice after hearing think-alouds and models, and giving kids opportunities to do it on their own. Mixing it up, so varying instruction, having vignettes or digital-based learning opportunities has been cited as a research-validated approach with opportunities to practice once you know, the video-enhanced learning has taken place. And of course, anything intentional about the area of vocabulary, as Robyn mentioned, is important.
And Mike mentioned that we were fortunate to work on a white paper with Jeanette Klingner, who was an expert in EL instruction, and that's a white paper published with McGraw-Hill Education, and that should be available. So that outlines different techniques and methods that work well with students who are English learners.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Let's see. This question asks, what are some free reading and math interventions that I can direct my teachers to? Let's see, maybe start with Nancy and Ron. Maybe you could talk about some of your work with McGraw-Hill on that one, and then we'll go to Robyn.
As far as free, I'm thinking there's a website. It's either freereading.org or freereading.com. It's one of the two, but there's some recommended strategies and things that you could certainly point teachers to that would be helpful in the area of reading. I mean, anything from Intervention Central, there certainly are great strategies and tips related to reading. Math is another example. And of course, but typically when you're looking at intervention kids, you in my opinion, should be really looking at programs that have been research validated, and you're looking at purchasing programs because these kids are behind and they do need a regimented, field-tested, approach to doing business, which would involve a teacher presentation book, student materials that align to the teacher presentation book, those kinds of things. So that's what I would look first and foremost at.
Sure. And Robyn, recommendations on math interventions?
Yes. I have to wholeheartedly agree with Nancy that a program that has been designed by experts in the field with various print and online components and strategies for teachers to use with students who are already needing additional help certainly is the best case scenario. But for free, two things popped into my head right away. One is you can find all kinds of stuff for fact fluency. I really think it's as simple as Googling multiplication fact fluency, and you'll find more games and things than you can possibly use. And then it's up to the teacher to judge and decide which ones she likes. But those are just very low-level, low-level skill kinds of things. It's just memorization. For more conceptual development, there is a company called Conceptua Math that has numerous free math tools that develop conceptual understanding, so that while the program itself, buying the lessons and stuff like that costs money, the tools are free. And a teacher could certainly use those tools to develop lessons that would be highly motivating for kids.
Okay, all right, great, thank you all. Another question here asking about high school. How does any of this look in a high school classroom? Maybe we'll go to Nancy and Ron first. Does the approach differ at the high school level, or do these intervention principles kind of hold true there as well?
The principles hold true as well for high school. And again, if you've got kids who are low readers, then we're looking at probably setting up separate classes for them and so forth. If you're looking at content area classes like science and social studies, it certainly would be a benefit for all kids to look at what are some content area strategies that we can teach the kids. I mean, kids don't know how to take notes out of their science and social studies textbooks. They don't know how to study for a test. There's a great article by Dunlosky and colleagues on best practices on studying that I think we should do at a high school level that you could infuse right in the content area classes, let alone having a class on remedial reading strategies. So, those would be just some pointers I would recommend. But
again, that multi-tiered system of delivery generalizes across the different grade levels and environments, and that's the way we would look at that. So you're meeting the needs of the students at least 3 levels if you're looking at 3-tier or 4-tier, 4 out of 4-tier implementation. So it does hold true at the higher levels.
Okay, great. Robyn, do you have any thoughts about maybe even specifically the math intervention at the high school level, how that differs?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, and I have to be consistent again with Ron and Nancy, particularly with what Ron said, which is, believe it or not, I think that in many cases it's pretty much the same. You want to motivate the kids. You want to get them roughly where they are. Go back and hit and go back as far as you have to, and then pick up and close all the gaps along the way. A lot of I don't want to say praise, but encouragement and just instruction that fits and aligns, and some TLC. So I would have to say I don't care if they're 5 or 15. I think it's pretty much, pretty much parallel there.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Okay, this one asks, how can administrators ensure that intervention educators are getting enough of and the right types of professional development training for continuous improvement? Ron and Nancy, I'm sure a lot of administrators on the call here, from their perspective, how do they make sure that their intervention specialists are getting the right kind of professional development?
I think it's important anytime you implement whatever program it is, I mean, you know, a reading intervention program, writing, math, that you have a person who provides training for the school or district who's actually used the program, perhaps in classrooms, or, you know, certainly has a very deep working knowledge of the program. But more importantly, beyond just a workshop, someone needs to actually get in and coach the teachers as they use it and watch the teachers implement the program, provide feedback on the implementation, and then follow it up with booster training so that the teachers are getting more focused, again, instruction related to the program, and again followed by additional coaching. Just absolutely critical. I mean, a one-shot workshop certainly it sets the stage, but it doesn't necessarily ensure that the program's being done with fidelity.
Okay, great. Same question to you, Robyn. Any additional thoughts or anything when it comes to professional development for intervention?
Well, two things come to mind. One is that, again, I agree with everything Nancy said, but I also think that making sure that people, if they are purchasing a product, really utilizing, optimizing the Teacher's Edition, where so much information is located and is so often overlooked. And I think more important than anything else is having a coach, somebody who is dedicated to really helping teachers with interventions, with pinpointing kids' needs, somebody who has a vertical view of mathematics and good pedagogy, who understands that, you know, if a kid doesn't know B, identify A.
Okay, great. Another question, how can teachers ensure that they are effectively communicating with each other and with families about student progress and needs? Ron and Nancy, how can teachers ensure that?
I think it's good, and we've been helping with lots of implementations. The schools that have the PLCs, professional learning communities, where they have grade level team meetings, they talk about their instruction that they're doing, perhaps even having training devoted to grade level. If you look at programs that have a regimented way of tracking data, progress monitoring, where administrators can access that, parents can access that in terms of performance for their kids, teachers can look at various classrooms. That's certainly a nice feature of a program, but again, it's just setting time aside for teachers to be able to work together to have common kinds of conversations about kids.
Okay, sure. And then how about the other aspect of that question is communicating with families? I think that's a really interesting question. Is there any advice you can give in terms of communicating about their students' progress and their needs and how they may differ from other students?
Well, you know, so, again, programs will have portals that families can access electronically to see how their kids are doing, to be able to query and ask for further information. Programs, again, have family resources that they can send home to families to be able to work on additional skills for additional practice. You know, those kinds of aspects are nice with programs that include those features.
Well, I think that it's important for schools too, if they have a portal where parents and families can visit, like our own children, Nancy's and mine, when they were in school, we had Power School where the parents could access, and you could have notes from the teacher on how the student's progressing and so on is important. So, and teaching parents on how to do that, how to access student information. I think it's important to keep parents up to date on what's going on with their children and a way to access that information that's easy for them.
Okay, thank you both. Robyn, you have any thoughts, anything to add in terms of teachers effectively communicating about student progress and then communicating both with each other but then also with families?
Yes, I firmly believe in having teachers plan in grade level team meetings and share. I like everybody in a grade level to administer the same assessments roughly at the same time and then come back and look at the data and talk about what works, what doesn't, and all that kind of stuff. That's in terms of communicating with each other. As far as the parent and community outreach is concerned, there are many parents out there that can't read the data, that don't understand the portal or how to get into it, don't use that time, but coming directly from the teacher via email, a phone call here and there, it really goes a long way. And I'll just take it one step further. If you know you have kids that are going to be Tier 3 kids, Tier 2 to Tier 3 kids, I think a call very close to the beginning of the year just to introduce yourself, let parents know who you are and that you're always available and that you're in their corner and you want to talk about anything, really opens the lines of communication and makes the progress all the better because they're your team. They're on your team and you're on theirs, and they know that. So I think the direct communication, I don't think there's anything better. It's time-consuming, but certainly worth it.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, we're getting close to the top of the hour here, but it might be good for this question here, looking at the future here, saying what are the top trends and advancements on the horizon for intervention courseware? Ron and Nancy, the things that come to mind in terms of technology, software, new capabilities in the realm of intervention.
Yeah, I mean, anything that, I think that the notion when I was reading the Claude Goldenberg study about mixing it up, anything that has some digital aspects to it, really helps allow one-on-one or very close individualized learning opportunities. That also includes opportunities for teachers to be a part of smaller, large group instruction, so any kind of print-based activities that the teacher participates in. And then, one thing we have to ensure for students who struggle is project-based learning and having students have an opportunity to research topics and learn to speak about what they research and put together a PowerPoint presentation as an example. And so anything that looks at digital-based learning with teacher-directed print-based activities and then moves kids into these project-based learning experiences, I think certainly is a trend for the future.
But I think the other, adding on to that, I think certainly with teacher-led or in digital, ensuring that the program can differentiate the instruction can be molded to the student learning. So acceleration cycles, for example, or remediation cycles that are built into the program. So if students are struggling, then we stop and we reteach before the student moves on and starts becoming frustrated. And again, if students are gaining the skills quickly, then being able to accelerate that performance. I think that's important to build in to any program.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're going to have to end it there here as we come to the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So on behalf of District Administration Magazine, I'd like to thank our speakers once again for today. Nancy and Ron and Robyn, thank you all so much. This was a great event. And thank you again to our sponsor, McGraw-Hill, for sponsoring today's event. And to you, our audience, of course, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found today's web seminar informative and useful to you. Producing events like this one is just part of our mission at DA to inform school district leaders like you about news and trends in K-12 management. You'll find more coverage about issues such as the ones we discussed here in the pages of our print magazine, as well as on our website and in our free daily e-newsletter, DA Daily. And as I mentioned before, for those of you in the audience who would like to share this event with your colleagues or review our speakers' presentations at your own pace, you can access it from our website by going to the URL that you see on your screen here, where it will be posted in the archive section within about 48 hours. And you'll get an email notice about that when it's ready. If you'd like to download our speaker slides, you'll find instructions and a link in a thank you email that you'll receive later on today. So that is it for today's event. Once again, I'm Kurt Isley-Durley for District Administration on behalf of our producer, Kylie Lacey, and my other colleagues on our production team. Goodbye, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.